I have been wanting for several weeks to come back to Barbara Ehrenreich, who died in the very beginning of September as we were sort of mid-move, and I couldn't find my copy of one of her excellent books, Dancing in the Streets, at that time. So we just spent a little bit of time talking about her. And this is perfect because Dancing in the Streets, A History of Collective Joy. It's a 2006 book. It's a book that I actually used in some of my curriculum when I was teaching with a linguist. We were teaching both animal and human communication. And Ehrenreich, much missed. So we mentioned her in Livestream 140, and then also a year before that in Livestream 95. As it turns out, but I want to share two excerpts from this book, Dancing in the Streets, beginning just the very beginning of chapter 1, in which she effectively defends the idea of festival, of actual festival. And this chapter 1 is called The Archaic Roots of Ecstasy. And it's page and a half or so here. Let's see if I can find it. And then a very short excerpt from later on in the book to give us a little food for thought, as if we need more. Okay, I can't find. I did use one of my fancy book darts. There we go. Okay, The Archaic Roots of Ecstasy, from chapter 1 of Dancing in the Streets, A History of Collective Joy, by newly departed Barbara Ehrenreich. Go back 10,000 years and you will find humans toiling away at the many mundane activities required for survival: hunting, food gathering, making weapons and garments, beginning to experiment with agriculture. But if you land on the right moonlit night or seasonal turning point, you might also find them engaged in what seems by comparison to be a gratuitous waste of energy, dancing in lines or circles, sometimes wearing masks or what appear to be costumes, often waving branches or sticks. Most likely both sexes would be dancing, each in its separate line or circle. Their faces and bodies might be painted with red ochre, or so archaeologists guess from the widespread presence of that colored ore in the sites of human settlements. The scene, in other words, might not be too different from the savage rituals encountered by 19th century Westerners among native peoples of the world. We can infer these scenes from prehistoric rock art depicting dancing figures, which has been discovered at sites in Africa, India, Australia, Italy, Turkey, Israel, Iran, and Egypt, among other places. Whatever else they did, our distant ancestors seem to find plenty of time for the kinds of activities the anthropologist Victor Turner described as liminal, or peripheral to the main business of life. Festive dancing was not a rare or incidental subject for prehistoric artists. The Israeli archaeologist Yosef Garfinkel asserts that dancing scenes, quote, were a most popular, indeed almost the only subject used to describe interaction between people in the Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods. When such danced rituals originated is not known, but there is evidence they may go back well into the Paleolithic era or Stone Age. At one recently discovered site in England, drawings on the ceiling of a cave show conga lines of female dancers, along with drawings of animals like bison and ibex, which are known to have become extinct in England 10,000 years ago. So, well before people had a written language, and possibly before they took up a settled lifestyle, they danced and understood dancing as an activity important enough to record on stone. It is not easy to read the excitement of a danced ritual into prehistoric drawings. The figures are highly stylized. Many of those catalogued by Garfinkel are little more than stick figures or silhouettes. Few possess facial features or anything like a facial expression. Even the identification of them as dancers takes some interpretive work. The figures have to be using their limbs in ways not associated with normal activities, holding their arms up, holding hands in a circle, raising their legs, or leaping, for example. Yet even in these crude two-dimensional depictions, some of the recognizable ingredients of more recent festive traditions shine through. Masking and costuming, for example. Some of the male figures wear masks in the form of animal heads or abstract designs. Other dancers wear what archaeologists interpret as costumes, such as leopard skins. In the clearest sign of motion and possibly excitement, some of the figures have long, flowing hair standing up from their heads as if they are moving rapidly and tossing their heads to some long, silenced drumbeat. Clearly, danced rituals do not seem like a waste of energy to prehistoric peoples. They took the time to fashion masks and costumes. They wantonly expended calories in the execution of the dance. They preferred to record these scenes over any other group activity. Thus, anthropologist Victor Turner's consignment of danced ritual to an occasional, marginal, or liminal status seems especially unwarranted in the prehistoric case, and more representative of the production-oriented mentality of our own industrial age than of prehistoric priorities. Surely this people knew hardship and were often threatened by food shortages, disease, and wild animals. But ritual, of a danced and possibly ecstatic nature, was central to their lives. Perhaps only because our own lives, so much easier in many ways, are also so constrained by the imperative to work. We have to wonder why.
Fantastic.
Yeah, she's brilliant, and I recommend the whole book as a history of sort of ecstatic ritual and festival, and would say embodied engagement with other individuals in real time and space is festival. Put virtual in front of it, and it's no festival. Put fact-checking in front of it, and you're really far afield. And you can use words any way you want, because the First Amendment does guarantee us that, but it doesn't mean what you think it does.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. So later in the book, halfway through or so, she builds a compelling argument, and it's not one that she is certain of, and she quotes various historians, but posits as a real possibility that apparently there's a fair amount of historical evidence for a rise in what we now understand to be depression, but what would have been called melancholia in early modern times, in like the Middle Ages and even the Renaissance. And she posits that the rise in melancholia, the rise in depression, may be connected to the disappearance of traditional festivities, specifically festival. And she points to various historians' discussion of the rise of subjectivity and the discovery of the inner self. And she summarizes several concrete changes that occurred in the early modern period, first among the upper middle class, because these were things that took some money, and then and then, of course, came into all of our worlds and helped create this modern idea of the individual as a walled fortress, which answers neither to others nor to the laws of nature, that latter bit being my addition. So here's what she says. There's historical evidence of shifts in the early modern period. Mirrors in which to examine oneself became popular among those who could afford them, along with self-portraits. Rembrandt painted over 50 of them. And autobiographies in which to revise and elaborate the image that one has projected to others. In bourgeois homes, public spaces that guests may enter are differentiated for the first time from the private spaces, bedrooms for example, in which one may retire to let down one's guard and truly be oneself. More decorous forms of entertainment, plays and operas, requiring people to remain immobilized, each in his or her separate seat, began to provide an alternative to the promiscuously interactive and physically engaging pleasures of carnival.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
so she's got
really
mirrors,
point.
Self-portraits, autobiographies, the separation of public from private spaces within your own structure, and a movement from entertainment in which you are physically embodied and moving and interacting to one in which you are mostly still and receptive.
So there are really two things in there, as I see it. Okay. One is a sort of precursor to the obsession with image that social media then brings.
Yes,
right? This
very
sort
much
of sense of your public self and your private self.
Yes.
Being potentially very, very different.
And that to me ties back to the transgender stuff. That we have people who are so concerned with their sense of self that what they actually are takes a backseat.
Right. And then the second thing in there, something I've pointed to, the radical shift in our relationship with music in particular, maybe all art, but music in particular, where we become consumers of something that every single human being would have been a producer of until fairly recently.
Or at least interacting with. Like, even if not everyone drummed or sang or played a string instrument, everyone would have been dancing with the music at some point.
I believe there's actually no distinction there. That every single person, every single healthy person would have participated in the group music.
The scene.
Yep. Singing, dancing, otherwise keeping time. And the idea of, we're very compelled by music, right? It drives us. We want it, but we want to consume it. It's somebody else's product, and it's foreign to us, and some of us can't produce it, right?
Yeah.
It's a very odd relationship, and it's a new one. So anyway, I don't see them as exactly the same thing, but I do think she's pointing to a radical change in our relationship to the entire realm And it's a really subtle and important point.
And can you imagine someone at Carnival, which we have interacted with some in Ecuador and I in Panama as well, or one of these older rites from, say, Greece, which became, ecstatic in the original sense of the word. Can you imagine any such people being invited to the Pointer Institute's fact-checking festival? Eager for a festival that wasn't otherwise on the calendar, and arriving and finding, well, reason for melancholia, honestly, right? Like, the hypothesis that as festival, as interactive engagement with your body and your community on a regular basis, at regular moments as seasons changed, at regular holidays, became less and less a part of the world, so too did melancholia increase. I like this as a hypothesis very much.